All right. I'm not going to jump directly into the talk because I am feeling a bit sleepy with that wonderful lunch that I had. So I want to play a fun game with you all. Now, this is a game that I hacked. I have not created this from scratch, but this is a game that I hacked and I just added a support for the PS5 controller. So now I can basically play the old classic Snake game with my PS5 controller. Now, what I want to do over here is I don't want to look at the screen while I am playing this. I need you all to tell me what I should do. Should I go right? Should I go left? Should I go up? Or should I go down? So are we all ready? All right. So I'm just going to start the game. I'm connecting my controller, and it's all started. So I'm not looking at the screen. I want you all to know what I should do. Wait, it's already going up. That's something I know. Wait, okay. Wait, what? All right. Anyways, I'm not gonna like. Okay, I feel like the room is up now in a good spirit. Everyone is feeling a bit energized. So I'm gonna stop playing the game. Maybe the last. This would be the last one. I don't know. All right. Okay. All right. We lose, but this was like. Okay. Thank you. So basically, in this talk, I'm gonna talk about how I created or added the support for the Web HID for the PS5 controller using the Web HID API. But before jumping into that, all the slides and all the source code and all the code that I'll be sharing throughout is available on this Bitly. It's basically a Notion page which contains the slides and all the other resources. So if you want to grab the slides, grab the resources, you can find it all in here. All right. Moving forward, a small disclosure. I am not a gamer. So if you have any gaming questions, if you're going to ask me which is my favorite game, I would not have a good answer that you were expecting. And the funny thing is that I got a PS5 at a flash sale when like it was very rare to get a PS5. So I was like sitting on my browser, refreshing the page just to get a PS5, which is ironic to the first statement. And no ChatGPT was harmed using while creating this particular talk, this presentation. All right. To do a quick introduction, I'm going to keep it short. My name is Harshil Agrawal. I work as a developer advocate at Contentful. For the folks who don't know about Contentful, Contentful is a composable content platform with an API-first architecture. Using Contentful, you can orchestrate content from multiple platforms, manage your content on Contentful, and publish it on any digital channel. Apart from doing developer advocacy at Contentful, I like to think about myself as an experimentalist because I do crazy projects like this, build crazy projects like this, and share with the community. That's what I'm doing here today. And all the illustrations, or most of the illustrations that you're going to see on the slides are kind of my own work. I'm trying to get into digital illustrations, but yeah, that's another topic. So the agenda for the talk looks something like this. We're going to start with the introduction, where I'm going to talk about APIs, I'm going to talk about the browser APIs, and then we're going to look into a few more demos, and with that demo, I'm going to also try to implement a couple of things that I'm going to show throughout the slides. And then I'm going to also do a bit of live coding, which is always scary when things don't work. So let's see how that goes. All right, so can I get a show of hands from you all if you know what an API means? All right, I see a couple of hands are down, no worries. I'm going to quickly explain you what API is. So API stands for Application Programming Interface. And it is basically, think of it as a language that our systems use to talk to each other. So if one server wants to talk with another server, you would have an API which these servers would use to talk to each other. Now, web APIs are basically the APIs which are on the web, which allow you to connect to the web, which allow you to connect to different devices across the web. And these web APIs can be categorized into two. The first is the third-party API. Now, the third-party APIs, I'm sure most of you have already played a bit around with it. Now, these APIs allow you to interact with a web server. These web servers can be anything. It can be APIs of a different platform where you want to access the data, or it can be APIs of a push-based notification system as well. These APIs, however, are not built in the browser, which means that you need to use libraries, external sources to make a call to these APIs. If you are using Node, Node now has an inbuilt fetch, which you can use to basically make an API call, or you can use libraries like Axios, Request, and so on. To give you a couple of examples and a bit more idea of what these APIs are, a YouTube API is an example for that. If you like building bots, Telegram API, you can use the Telegram API to build bots with that. And if you are using Contentful, you can use the Contentful API to fetch the content from Contentful and display it wherever you want. Now, compared to this third-party API, there are browser APIs. And as the name suggests, these browser APIs, they are built within the browser. And because they are built within the browser, they help you enhance the browser capabilities. They help you extend the browser capabilities. Some of the examples over here would be the Web Audio API, the Web HID API, and the Gamepad API. And in this talk, I'm going to talk about the Gamepad API and the Web HID API. So let's get started with the Gamepad API. The Gamepad API is a browser API which allows you to connect any kind of your Gamepad devices to your web applications. So think of it like a way to basically make it more make your web games more fun and easily accessible via game controllers like a PS5 controller or an Xbox controller or any other kind of controller. The Gamepad API, like you can connect your devices to the Gamepad API via a USB cable or via Bluetooth as well. I've had a quick demo for the Gamepad API, so let me see if I can pull that up. Do a quick refresh. All right. So this is a demo that I've created which uses the Gamepad API, and over here you can see that Mario is like trying to slowly move forward. It's also trying to go slowly upwards, and if it should shoot lasers, it does not, but it just makes some sound. But this is basically built using the Gamepad API. And as you can see, the experience is not that good. But I'm going to come back to that in a while. What the Gamepad API gives you is this wonderful interface. Once you connect your controller to your application, all that the user has to do is just click on any of the buttons of your controller, and it automatically detects that Gamepad. And then the Gamepad API would give you this interface, and based on what kind of controller it is, it might differ. Because I am using a DualSense controller, it has 4 axes, it has approximately 18 buttons, and this is all the information that I get. Now using this, I can tell my game like what should happen when a particular button is clicked. But if you go back to the example that I showed earlier, that interface or that experience wasn't that smooth. All right, let's hold on to that again and move on to the next part of that Gamepad API. Now the Gamepad API has 2 event listeners. The first is if you want to do something when the Gamepad is connected, when your application has access to that to the device. You can use the Gamepad Connect event listener, and then you can handle whatever you want to do within your game. Now similar to the Connect event, there is another event listener which is called Disconnect event listener. And this can be super useful when you want to alert your user like, hey, the Gamepad is disconnected, you might want to reconnect, or you might just want to stop the game. So you can use these 2 event listeners in your game logic. If you are building a game which has multiple gamepads connected to your application, you can use the get gamepad function and get the list of gamepads that are connected. Again, this would give you the game interface, the gamepad interface that we saw earlier, and you can use that information to let the user do whatever you want them to do. But as I mentioned, this has one limitation, and that it does not really give you a real-time experience. It does not really make that experience smooth. The user does not see the changes happening instantly. In the example that we saw earlier, I am using the axis to move Mario, but it goes really, really slow. And if we look at the code implementation of it, here is the event listener when the gamepad is connected. What I want to do is run a pool game function, but this runs every 300 milliseconds. And the pool game functions would basically get the Gamepad API and then run a game loop, which would basically then get the information from the Gamepad and then pass it on. And based on that information, it basically updates the state of Mario. Now, One thing to notice over here is we are using set interval. And this would run every 300 milliseconds, which again is not ideal. You can tweak those values and you can make it as close as to real time, but it's not really going to be real time experience for your user. Moving forward, the other limitation that the Gamepad API has is you cannot basically give a feedback to the user. If the game ends, there is going to be no feedback that the user is going to get with this game. So if I am, for the snake game, for example, when the game ended, and if I was using the Gamepad API, I would not really get a feedback on my controller, which would not be a good experience for a gamer. And this is where the web HID comes into the picture. Now, as you can see, there is a small label over there which says experimental, which means that this API is still under the experimental flag, and not all the browsers support it. But what exactly is HID? Let's try to understand that first. HID basically stands for Human Interface Devices. And these devices are basically bidirectional devices, which means that you can take the input from the game controller and you can also provide the output to the game controller. Over here, I'm going to use the word controller and HID devices interchangeably, but they are one and the same. So basically, that's what an HID device is. You can give the input and you can receive the output using the HID API, which solves one of the limitations that the Gamepad API had. Now, I can give my user a feedback whenever I want to, and my user is going to get a really good experience playing the games. So let's look into how the HID API really works. So the first thing that happens with the the web HID API is you need to specify, or you need to have some kind of interaction from the user before you actually connect that controller to the game. So let's go back to our Mario example, and this time we're going to go with the one where we have the same game implemented using the web HID API. Now over here you see I have a button that says connect. Now I need to get an input from the user before we start the game. So I'm clicking on connect, and now I get a pop-up which says, do you want to connect to this particular device? I'm saying yes, and now my game loads. Now again, this API also has event listeners, which we're going to look into in the next slides. But if I now try to move Mario, this experience is much more smooth, as you can see, compared to what I had in the Gamepad API. And hopefully the laser shows over here. So yeah, now the laser also works. Not to do anything with the API though. All right, so if you want to connect any kind of device to your application, you need to first check if HID is available or not. Again, remember, this is an experimental API. Not all the browsers support it. But once you have that check in place, you can basically execute the request device function, and in that pass on which particular device you want to connect your application with. Now, it takes a vendor ID and a product ID, and it might not be easy to get that information. So I've added a link over here from where you can get the product ID and the vendor ID of the HID devices out there. Now, similar to filters, there is an exclude filter parameter, which you can pass if you want to exclude certain devices that you don't want your users to ever connect to your application. You can pass on their vendor ID and their product ID over here in this function. Let's go ahead and try to code this as well. I'm just going to try to find my code over here. All right. So over here, I have a very simple code. As you can see, I have a check over here which says if HID in navigator, do something. So let's try to run that function. And now I am connecting my PS5 controller, passing on the vendor ID and the product ID. And I'm going to save this, go to my browser. Let's see what this is. All right. Now over here, I have 3 different buttons for 3 different things, but we're going to look at them step by step. Let's try to connect the device, and as you can see, I again get a pop-up. I click on connect, and my device is connected. Or it's showing a lot of information which we don't really need right now, but that's all good. As you can see, it also gives some kind of interface over here, which we are going to look into a minute. All right. Similar to the Gamepad API, you can also get a list of devices that your application has the access to. Now remember, your device might be connected to different HID devices, but this particular function, the get devices function, is only going to give you the list of devices that are connected to your application and not to your whole machine. So let's try to add that in here. All right, I'm gonna do get devices. I'm gonna save this, come back to my browser, refresh. Let's do connect. So we got it connected. We got some information. I'm gonna do get devices, and it still shows us that same kind of interface. So we saw earlier in the gamepad API, we got a gamepad interface. Similar to that, we have an HID interface for the web HID API. Now this interface contains collections, which is basically the information that you get. Think of it as the input and output that you get from the device. And then there is a function that is on input report. And then there is a flag that is opened, which over here is false. So by default, whenever you connect a device, it gets connected, but that connection is not open. The connection is closed, and you have to manually open up the connection so that the exchange of information can take place and data can flow between the devices. And then there is the meta information like the product ID, the product name, and the vendor ID. Now, as I mentioned, we need to explicitly open up the connection between our device and our application. So let's go ahead and do that. Over here, I'm going to go ahead and say await device.open, save this, come back to my application. I'm going to first connect this. It's connected. And now if you see, the open flag over here is changed, and now it's true, which means that now there can be an exchange of information from my device to the application and from the application to my device. Things look fine, things look good, but there is still one more catch. We have opened the connection, but there is no exchange of information really happening right now. Because if I, let's just say, interact with my controller right now, it's just still playing the Mario game, but nothing is happening in here. So let's take a step back before we get into how data is exchanged in the Web HID API. Let's talk about the data in Web HID first, because the data in Web HID is not as smooth as it was in the gamepad API. The data in Web HID comes in the raw format of zeros and ones. And if the mapping is not available out there, it can get really tricky to code your device and make it work as you want it to. But data in Web HID is also called as report, and there are three different kinds of report. The first is the input report. Well, this is the report which you would be basically sending in from your device to your application. The next is the output report, and this is this information that you would be sending from your application to your device. So now you have the possibility of sending out the feedback to your user for your games. And then there is something called feature report, which is again bidirectional. Remember, this is the Web HID API, which means there is bidirectional exchange of information happening. So using feature report, you can do that. You can send and receive the information at the same time. So now to listen to the input coming in from your controller, you can use the input report function, the input report listener. Or you can use the on input report function, which would basically listen it for the information and give you whatever it is rendered. So I'm going to use this particular function in here. All right, so I have my on input report function, and I'm extracting the data, the device, and the report ID from here, and I'm simply logging it on my console. So now I'm going to refresh. Oops. I'm going to refresh it again, just to be sure. I'm going to connect it. Now, as you see, I'm getting a list of data in here. Let me move this on the side. So it's continuously logging this data view over here. And this is what it gives, it returns. This is what the API would give you. It's basically an array buffer. And if I click on it, this is the data that it actually receives from the API. As I mentioned, the data does not look really pretty in this case, so you will have to basically do the mapping by yourself. Or if someone was kind enough and they had built some libraries on and have shared it on GitHub, you can basically use that as well. All right, moving forward, the other thing that you can do is send reports to your devices. So let's try to do that. Over here right now, The color on the light bar is red. I'm not sure if it's visible for all, but it's red. Trust me on my words, I'm not lying over here. And I'm going to show that to you. So let's go ahead and do that. So I have already played a lot with the different bits over here to find out what exact information or what bit works at which particular position. And I found out that, all right, so RGB sets at 45, 46, and 47. And what I want to do is set this to green instead of red. So I've set that over here, and I'm passing on the report ID as well as the rest of the data. I'm going to save this, come back to my browser. Just going to connect it again. All right, things are happening. We can see something in the console. And I'm going to click on change color. Something should happen. And it changes to green. And if you don't believe me, I am trying to show you over here. It's on green as well. All right, let's give it one more try, and let's try to change it to blue. Now that you all know it was green, I'm going to try to do it to blue. So I'm going to set it to 0. I'm going to set this to the full value. Let's come back. I'm going to connect again. Click on, again, this is green. I haven't clicked yet. I'm going to click change color. All right, OK. And now you can see that this is blue in color. Right. Now, similar to the send report function, as I mentioned, there is like feature report. I haven't got time to like play around with the bits of feature report, so I haven't executed that yet. I don't have code sample for that, but you can, if you get enough time, like it takes the same parameter as the send output function, which is the report ID and the data. And as I mentioned, with feature report, you can also receive the data. So there is another function called receive feature report, which you can use to receive the information from your controller. Now, in the Mario game that I showed earlier, let's go back to our browser. We had first the screen where the game wasn't loaded. And this was using the connect event listener. So once my game got connected to my controller, that's when the game got loaded. So you can do this using the connect event listener. And similar to what we had in the gamepad API, there is a disconnect event listener. So you can have a disconnect event listener where you just throw an error to the user, you just stop the game, or you basically implement the logic that you want for your game. Now, in the gamepad API, we did not really have to open the connection explicitly, but in the WebHID API, we do that. And if we open up a connection, we also need to make sure that we are closing the connection. And to do that, we use the close function. But if you want to close the connection and disconnect the controller completely, you use the forget function, and this would revoke the access of the user, and the user would have to go again through the whole connection flow. Now, we are almost coming to the end of the talk. And as I mentioned, like not all the browsers support this API. So all the browsers which are built on the Chromium engine support that. And surprisingly, Opera also supports the WebHID API. But Firefox, Safari, and all the rest of the browsers don't. And there's one particular reason for that, and that is the security issues. The WebHID API is interesting. It has opened a lot of gates for us, but it has major security issues. The first one is if your HID device contains some kind of private information, it can be easily accessible if your device is connected to a malicious application out there. It's not going to take a lot of efforts for the bad actors to collect that information from your HID devices. And that's the same for your sensors. So if you're someone who is very enthusiastic about IoT or home automation, which I am, you might want to think again if you want to take the WebHID approach. Because again, you have sensitive information on your sensors. Do you want other actors to get access to that? The other thing is because it's using information in the raw format, in the machine format, if you pass on some wrong information, it can easily harm the device. And you may I can basically like lose this controller, and I'll need to get a new one. And it's the same the other way around. If I pass on some wrong information to my machine via the application, it can harm my application as well, or it can harm my machine as well. And these are like the major security flaws that we have right now in the WebHID API world. And the community is working towards it. It's trying to solve and come up with better solutions for that. And one of the approaches that they did was like have a manual interaction with the user when you connect that device with the API. It did not automatically open up the connection when you connected the device. It would open up the connection only when you explicitly do that. And as a best practice, they always tell you to close the connection when the game ends or when you want to stop the interaction with your user. All right, I have one small demo that I kind of hacked yesterday. I hope it works, because in the morning it kind of broke. So we're going to try this out. We're going to see if it works. Again, a very fine gentleman built this game for JSK 13. I don't know if you know JSK 13. Check it out. It's a really fun competition that happens where you build games under 13 kilobytes using JavaScript. Really fun. And this is like a racing game, which obviously did not have support for PS controllers. I went ahead and I'm like, hey, like, why not just do that? So I've added a controller support for this. I'm going to try to do that. So now I can basically play the game with my PS5 controller. And I have boost. I have tried to implement it, everything over here. I don't know how good I am with this game. Every time I played the game, I never came first. And not even the top 3. So I don't know. But like, again, this demo is not up on the slides yet. I'm going to soon share it over there. But I'm going to stop playing. I'm just going to embarrass myself. All right, but yeah, I'm just going to share this demo as well, where you can just play around with it if you have a PS5 controller. If you want to add your controller, you can go ahead and do that as well. If you want to try out other examples, and if you have an ergometer laying around in your home, there is a fun project that is called Ergometer Space, which makes it really fun to use ergometer and makes you work out even more. And there is another cool project called Remap, which uses the WebHID API under the hood to allow you to remap your keyboard. And these are all the resources that I have used to learn about the WebHID API and create this talk particularly. And one of my favorite is the first one, which is basically a WebHID Explorer. So you can just pop it up on your browser, and it will give you a list of all the HID devices that are already connected or already present on your machine. On my Mac, like the keyboard, the trackpad, even the touch bar is like an HID thing, so I can configure it if I want to. So that's the extent which this particular Explorer goes into. And again, if you did not get a chance to get the slides, here's the link again. You can just take a picture if you want to, and I'm going to soon upload the code for the game that I showed last as well. All right. Thank you all for listening to my talk, and if you have any questions, I think now's the time. Okay.